In March 2001, Rick Sullivan kissed his wife goodbye at 4:30 a.m., climbed into his red Kenworth, and pulled out of the Flying J truck stop in Amarillo, Texas. He was hauling electronics to Phoenix, a routine run he'd made dozens of times. His CB crackled with the usual chatter as he merged onto I-40 West. "Catch you on the flip side," he radioed to another driver. That was the last anyone heard from Rick Sullivan. His truck vanished somewhere between Amarillo and Albuquerque, along with $2.3 million worth of cargo. The insurance paid out. The case went cold. His family was told he probably ran off with the load, started a new life in Mexico with all that money. But 7 years later, in 2008, a flash flood in New Mexico's Gila wilderness would wash away more than just dirt and rocks. It would expose the rusted cab of a red Kenworth buried under years of desert sand. And inside, investigators would find something that proved Rick Sullivan never ran anywhere. He was murdered for a secret he'd stumbled onto, a secret worth killing for, worth covering up, worth keeping buried in the desert for 7 long years. Tommy Sullivan was rebuilding a transmission when his phone rang. 7 years of working with his hands, fixing things that broke, trying to keep the family trucking business alive after his father disappeared. The call came at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday in October 2008, the kind of ordinary moment that splits your life into before and after. "Tommy Sullivan?" "Yeah, who's this?" "Detective Maria Santos, New Mexico State Police. We need to talk about your father." Tommy set down his wrench. The garage went quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the tick of cooling metal. Through the open bay door, he could see the faded sign that still read Sullivan Trucking in letters that needed repainting. The same sign his father had put up in 1995 when he'd started the business with nothing but a used Peterbilt and a dream. "My father's been gone 7 years. We found his truck." The words hit Tommy like cold water. He'd been 16 when Rick Sullivan disappeared, barely old enough to understand that grown men don't just vanish, but young enough to believe the stories about new lives and fresh starts. Now, at 23, he'd spent his entire adult life wondering what happened to his father. Where? Gila wilderness. Flash flood exposed it. "Mr. Sullivan, I think you should come down here." Tommy looked around the garage, Sullivan Trucking painted on the wall in faded letters. The business his father had built, the one Tommy had kept running on hope and stubbornness, and the insurance money that had felt like blood money but paid the bills. 2 trucks now, down from the 12 they'd had when his father was alive. But still running, still fighting. "I'll be there tomorrow." The drive to New Mexico took 8 hours through country that all looked the same. Flat desert punctuated by mesas and the occasional truck stop. Tommy had made this trip before, in the early years when every trucker sighting and every Jane Doe might have been his father. He'd followed false leads to California, Nevada, Arizona, always hoping, always disappointed. But this felt different, final. He met Detective Santos at the Deming substation. She was maybe 35, weathered face, eyes that had seen too much. The kind of cop who'd worked her way up in a man's world by being twice as tough as anyone else. She laid out photos on the conference room table like dealing cards. "The truck was buried under 8 feet of sand and debris," she said. "Been there at least 7 years. The recent flooding was the worst we've seen since the early 90s. Tommy stared at the photos. His father's red Kenworth, the one Rick had been so proud of. The custom paint job, the chrome exhaust stacks, the way he'd wash it every Saturday morning like it was a show car instead of a working truck. The cab was crushed now, the trailer long since separated and lost. But it was definitely the right truck. He could see part of the license plate, the Sullivan Trucking logo barely visible through the rust and sand. The cargo? Gone. Trailer's nowhere to be found. But Mr. Sullivan, there's something else. She handed him another photo, the driver's seat or what was left of it. And there, visible through the twisted metal and dried leather, were bones. Human bones, still wearing the remnants of a flannel shirt Tommy recognized. "We found your father." Tommy's hands shook as he held the photograph. 7 years of wondering, 7 years of birthday calls to his mother asking if there had been any word, 7 years of checking missing persons databases and hoping for a miracle. And his father had been in the desert the whole time, less than 300 miles from home. How? Medical examiners still working on it, but preliminary findings. Santos hesitated, studying Tommy's face. It wasn't an accident. Tommy looked up from the photos. "What do you mean?" "We found a bullet hole in the skull. Small caliber, close range, entry wound at the base of the cranium, execution style." The conference room felt too small suddenly. Tommy stood, paced to the window, stared out at the New Mexico desert that had kept his father's secret for 7 years. The same desert his father had driven through hundreds of times, hauling loads from Texas to California, never knowing it would become his grave. The insurance investigator said he ran off with the load. Ray Hutchins. I pulled his report. He closed the case in 6 weeks, ruled it voluntary disappearance. Said your father had gambling debts, woman troubles, the usual reasons men disappear. Santos gathered up the photos. But there's something about that cargo manifest that bothers me. What kind of something? Santos pulled out a file folder, thick with photocopied documents. Your father was hauling electronics from Zenith Distribution in Dallas to Phoenix Electronics. Standard stuff, computers, monitors, printers. Bill of lading shows $2.3 million worth of merchandise. But when I called both companies to verify the shipment, neither one has any record of it. Tommy felt the pieces clicking together in his mind, the way they did when he was diagnosing an engine problem. Fake manifest. That's what I'm thinking. Question is, what was he really carrying? And why was it worth killing for? They drove out to the site that afternoon. The Gila wilderness stretched in every direction, miles of desert scrub and rocky hills broken by arroyos and mesas. The kind of place where you could hide something for years, if you knew where to put it. Tommy had been here before as a kid, camping with his father and uncle during hunting season. Rick had always said the desert was honest. It didn't lie to you or make promises it couldn't keep. The truck had been found in an arroyo, a dry creek bed that only filled during flash floods. The recent rains had been part of an unusual weather pattern, monsoon moisture flowing up from Mexico in late September. The water had carved new channels through the sand, washing away years of accumulated debris. Whoever put it here knew the desert, Santos said as they walked around the excavation site. Crime scene tape fluttered in the wind, marking the perimeter where they'd found the truck. This arroyo hasn't run water since the floods of '92. Perfect hiding spot. Tommy looked at the twisted metal, trying to imagine his father's last moments. Rick Sullivan had been a careful driver, a cautious man who checked his route twice and always called home at night. He wouldn't have driven into an arroyo voluntarily. He was forced off the road, or told to drive here. We found tire tracks, faint but still visible after all these years. Desert preserves things. Looks like he was followed by at least one other vehicle, maybe 2. Santos knelt by the truck's cab, pointed to something Tommy hadn't noticed. Deep scratches in the metal around the doorframe, tool marks where someone had tried to pry something open. See these? Someone tried to break into the sleeper compartment. After the crash, after your father was already dead. Looking for something? That's my guess. Question is, did they find it? They searched the wreckage for another hour, but 7 years in the desert had left little intact. Most of the truck's interior had been scavenged by animals or destroyed by weather. The logbooks were gone, the CB radio missing, even the registration papers had crumbled to dust. But as they were preparing to leave, Tommy noticed something glinting in the sand near the driver's side. "What's that?" Santos brushed away the dirt with a small whisk broom, revealing a small metal object half buried in the hardpan. A key, brass, tarnished but intact, with numbers etched into the metal. "Storage unit key," she said, examining it closely. "Number 247. Tommy took the key, felt its weight in his palm. It was warm from the desert sun, the metal smooth with age. Dad always said, "Keep your important things where nobody thinks to look." Any idea what he meant by that? Tommy pocketed the key, looked back at the wreckage one more time. Somewhere in this mess was the truth about what happened to his father. Let's find out. They spent the next day checking every storage facility within 100 miles of where the truck was found. Most had been built after 2001, which ruled them out. Others had changed ownership so many times that records from 7 years ago were lost or destroyed. But in truth or consequences, a faded tourist town built around hot springs and UFO legends, they found Desert Storage, a small facility that had been operating since the 1990s. The manager, an elderly man named Pete Kowalski, remembered Rick Sullivan immediately. "Good customer," Pete said, leading them to Unit 247. He moved slowly using a cane, but his eyes were sharp. Paid cash, always on time, quiet guy, kept to himself. Haven't seen him in years, though. "How many years?" Santos asked. Pete consulted a battered ledger book, the kind they'd used before everything went digital. "Last payment was March 2001. Been meaning to auction off the contents, but paperwork gets complicated when someone disappears. Insurance companies, next of kin, all that legal stuff." Unit 247 was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, secured with the same padlock that had been there for over 7 years. Inside, they found boxes of documents, a few personal items, and something that made Tommy's blood run cold. A video camera and several VHS tapes, all carefully labeled and stored in waterproof containers. "Dad never owned a video camera," Tommy said, picking up the Sony Handycam. It was an older model, the kind that used 8mm tapes, probably worth $1,000 when it was new. Santos examined the tapes. Each was labeled with dates and locations in Rick's careful handwriting. March 5th, 2001, Dallas pickup. March 10th, 2001, truck stop meeting. The most recent was marked March 15th, 2001, final evidence, the day before Rick disappeared. He was documenting something, Santos said, building a case. They found more in the boxes. Financial records showing payments from Zenith Distribution to numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands, photos of warehouse facilities, shipping manifests, and a detailed map of truck routes between Texas and Arizona. And buried at the bottom of one box, a life insurance policy that had never been claimed. "Mom never knew about this," Tommy said, studying the policy. $500,000, with Tommy listed as the beneficiary. If she'd known, she wouldn't have had to work 2 jobs to keep the house. They watched the tapes at the police station, using an old VCR Santos had found in the evidence room. The quality was poor, clearly recorded in secret with the camera hidden in Rick's truck. The first tape showed the interior of a warehouse somewhere Tommy didn't recognize. Men in coveralls were loading wooden crates onto trucks, working with the kind of efficiency that comes from practice. "This is Rick Sullivan," his father's voice came through the camera's microphone, low and tense. March 5th, 2001. "If something happens to me, people need to know what I found." Tommy gripped the arms of his chair. It was strange hearing his father's voice after so many years, seeing his hands gesture at the camera. Rick looked older than Tommy remembered, worry lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. The camera panned across a parking lot filled with trucks. In the distance, Tommy could see men moving between the vehicles, but the image was too dark to make out details. The audio was clearer, though, voices shouting instructions, the sound of forklifts and loading equipment. "I've been hauling loads for Zenith Distribution for 6 months, his father's voice continued. Always the same route. Dallas to Phoenix, always the same cargo manifest. Electronics, high-end stuff, computers and monitors. But tonight I opened one of the crates." The camera moved closer to a truck, zoomed in on its trailer. The back doors were open, revealing stacks of wooden crates marked with military stenciling. Rick's voice was barely a whisper now. "It's not electronics. It's guns, military-grade weapons, assault rifles, ammunition, explosives, enough to arm a small army." Tommy felt sick. His father had stumbled onto a gun-running operation, something big enough and dangerous enough to kill for. "I counted 30 crates in this truck alone, maybe more in the others, and the trucks." The camera panned to show license plates from different states, different companies. "They're all registered to shell companies, fake businesses with P.O. box addresses." The video cut to Rick sitting in his truck's cab, face barely visible in the dashboard lights. The camera was propped on the passenger seat, pointing at him while he made his report. "I don't know who's behind this, but it's big. The money involved has to be in the millions." He held up a sheet of paper covered with numbers. "This is just 1 week's worth of shipments. 20 trucks, all carrying the same electronics, all going to the same Phoenix warehouse." Rick looked directly into the camera, his face drawn with exhaustion and fear. "Tommy, if you're watching this, it means they got me. I tried to get evidence to the FBI, but I think someone inside is involved. The agent I talked to, Henderson, asked too many questions about what I knew and who I'd told. Trust no one, and whatever you do, don't try to finish what I started." The tape ended with a click. The room was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic outside. Santos rewound the tape, played it again. "Your father documented everything. This is the kind of evidence that brings down entire organizations." Tommy was staring at the blank TV screen, seeing his father's face in the static. He knew they were going to kill him. Why didn't he run? Take his evidence and disappear? Tommy thought about his father, about the man who'd taught him to drive a truck, to fix an engine, to always do the right thing even when it was hard. Rick Sullivan had been a by-the-book kind of guy, the type who returned money when cashiers gave him too much change. Because that's not who he was. He wouldn't have been able to live with himself, knowing those weapons were going to kill people. They found more evidence in the remaining tapes. Conversations recorded with a wire hidden in Rick's shirt. Meetings with Zenith distribution personnel who thought they were dealing with just another trucker. Financial records showing the scope of the operation, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of stolen military weapons sold to anyone with cash. One name kept appearing in the documents, Colonel James Harrison, listed as a logistics consultant for Zenith Distribution. Santos ran a background check and found he was a retired Army officer who'd worked in weapons procurement before starting his own defense contracting company. "This goes all the way to the Pentagon," Santos said, studying Harrison's military record. He had access to weapons that were supposed to be destroyed after decommissioning. Instead, he was selling them. Another name that appeared frequently was Detective Ray Hutchins, the insurance investigator who'd closed Rick's case so quickly. According to the financial records, Hutchins had received over $100,000 in payments from accounts connected to Zenith Distribution. "Son of a bitch," Santos muttered. "He was in on it from the beginning." "Is he still alive?" "Still working, actually. Made detective lieutenant last year." "But Tommy, if Hutchins was involved, this conspiracy goes deeper than just a trucking company. We're talking about law enforcement, military personnel, maybe federal agents." Tommy's phone rang. Unknown number, no caller ID. "Don't answer that," Santos said, but Tommy already had. "Tommy Sullivan." The voice was electronically distorted, processed through some kind of voice changer. "Yeah." "Stop digging into your father's disappearance. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." "Who is this?" "Someone who knew Rick. He was a good man who stuck his nose where it didn't belong. Don't make the same mistake. My father was murdered for trying to do the right thing. Your father was killed because he threatened a multi-million-dollar operation that kept dangerous weapons out of the wrong hands. Walk away now, or end up like him." The line went dead. Santos was already on her radio, calling for a trace. "They're watching us." "Good," Tommy said grimly. "Maybe we can draw them out." That night, Tommy couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the video, about his father's face in the dashboard lights, about the choice Rick had made to document everything instead of just walking away. His mother had remarried in 2005, a good man named Carl, who'd helped raise Tommy and never tried to replace his father. But Tommy had never been able to let go of the questions, the need to know what really happened. At 3 a.m., his phone rang again. "Tommy, it's Pete from the storage place." The old man's voice was shaky, frightened. "Someone broke into Unit 247 tonight. Cleaned it out completely. Tommy was out of bed, pulling on clothes. Everything. Every box, every tape. Professional job. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Cut the lock clean off, didn't damage anything else. In and out in maybe 10 minutes. By the time Tommy and Santos reached Desert Storage, it was over. Unit 247 was empty except for a few scattered papers and a note taped to the wall in block letters. Your father should have minded his own business. So should you. But whoever had cleaned out the unit had missed something. Under a loose floorboard that Santos spotted with her flashlight, they found a manila envelope marked insurance in Rick's handwriting. Inside were documents that made the gun-running operation look small-time. Bank records showing wire transfers in the millions between defense contractors and offshore accounts. Purchase orders for weapons that were supposed to be destroyed by the military, but were instead diverted to civilian buyers. And shipping manifests showing where those weapons had ended up. Cartel territories in Mexico, militia groups in Montana, revolutionary movements in South America. Anyone with enough cash to buy American firepower. This isn't just about selling surplus weapons, Santos said, studying the papers by flashlight. This is about a systematic program to funnel military hardware to anyone willing to pay, regardless of who they are or what they plan to do with it. At the bottom of the envelope, Tommy found something else, a business card for someone named Marcus Webb at the Department of Defense. On the back, his father had written, "Trustworthy, maybe the only one." "We need to call him," Tommy said. "If he's still alive," Santos replied, "and if he's really trustworthy." The number on the card was disconnected, but Santos used her law enforcement contacts to track down Marcus Webb. He was now a federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C., specializing in arms trafficking cases. When they reached him by secure phone, Webb's reaction told them everything they needed to know. "Rick Sullivan," he said quietly, and Tommy could hear the weight of old regret in his voice. "I wondered what happened to him." You knew my father. He contacted me in March 2001, said he had evidence of military weapons being sold to civilian buyers through a defense contractor. We were supposed to meet the week after he disappeared. Webb paused, and Tommy could hear papers rustling in the background, the sound of someone pulling old files. Your father was going to be my key witness in the biggest arms trafficking case in decades. He had inside access, documentation, everything we needed to bring down the entire network. When he vanished, the whole investigation collapsed. Who was behind it? Zenith Distribution was a front company. The real operation was run by Colonel James Harrison, retired military defense contractor connections. He had access to weapons that were supposed to be destroyed, instead sold them on the black market to fund God knows what. Santos leaned into the phone. Is Harrison still alive? Very much so. He's now CEO of Harrison Defense Solutions, one of the biggest military contractors in the country. Legitimate business now, apparently. But I've never stopped watching him. Tommy felt anger building in his chest, 7 years of suppressed rage finally finding a target. So he got away with it. Not if we can prove he killed your father. I've been waiting 7 years for another chance at Harrison, if you have Rick's evidence. It was stolen, Santos said, but we have copies of some documents, and the storage unit might have fingerprints. Then we reopen the case. Federal jurisdiction this time, and I've got resources now that I didn't have in 2001. The federal investigation moved quickly once Webb's team took over. Within a week, they had search warrants for Harrison Defense Solutions facilities in 3 states. What they found was even worse than what Rick Sullivan had documented, a systematic program to sell decommissioned military weapons to anyone willing to pay, with profits in the hundreds of millions funneled through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. But Harrison wasn't going quietly. The night before the FBI was scheduled to arrest him, Tommy's phone rang one more time. You should have listened, the electronically distorted voice said. Now you're going to end up like your father. Come and try it, Tommy replied, and hung up. The attempt on his life came 2 days later. Tommy was leaving the police station after giving another statement when a sniper's bullet shattered the window behind him. He dove for cover behind a patrol car as more shots rang out, then saw a figure running across the parking lot toward a waiting sedan. Tommy gave chase, his legs pumping as he closed the distance. The gunman was older, slower, and Tommy tackled him before he could reach his car. When they pulled off the ski mask, Tommy found himself staring at a face he recognized from his father's photographs, Detective Ray Hutchins, now a lieutenant. You killed him, Tommy said, holding Hutchins until backup arrived. I didn't want to, Hutchins gasped, blood running from his nose where he'd hit the pavement. But Rick wouldn't let it go. He was going to destroy everything. Everything. You mean your payoffs? Hutchins laughed bitterly. You think this was about money? Your father stumbled onto a government black operation. Those weapons weren't stolen. They were being sold to fund classified missions that couldn't show up in any budget. Tommy felt the ground shift under him. You're saying the government killed my father? I'm saying your father threatened national security. Sometimes good men have to die for the greater good. But Hutchins was lying, trying to cover his tracks one more time. The federal investigation revealed the truth. Harrison's operation was purely criminal, using government connections to steal weapons for personal profit. The claims about black operations and national security were just another layer of misdirection. Colonel James Harrison was arrested at his Virginia estate 3 weeks later, along with 17 co-conspirators, including 4 active-duty military officers, 2 FBI agents, and a federal judge who'd been helping to cover up the operation. The weapons trafficking ring had operated for over a decade, with profits exceeding $400 million. At Harrison's trial 6 months later, the prosecution played Rick Sullivan's videos. The courtroom was silent as they watched a dead man testify against his killers, his voice reaching across 7 years to finally tell the truth. Harrison sat stone-faced through the testimony, but Tommy could see fear in his eyes when the evidence mounted against him. Harrison was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Ray Hutchins got 25 years for conspiracy and murder. The other conspirators received sentences ranging from 10 to 15 years, their military careers and reputations destroyed. But for Tommy Sullivan, the real victory was smaller and more personal. His father's body was finally released for burial, and the family held the funeral they'd never been able to have. The service was held at the same church where Rick and his wife Linda had been married, with truckers from across the Southwest coming to pay their respects to one of their own. At the cemetery, Marcus Webb approached Tommy with something wrapped in cloth. "We found this in Harrison's personal safe," Webb said. "I thought you should have it." It was Rick Sullivan's CB radio, the one from his truck. The same radio Tommy remembered from childhood road trips when his father would let him talk to other drivers and learn the trucker's language of 10 codes and road reports. On the side, in faded letters, someone had written, "For Tommy, keep on trucking." Tommy held the radio, remembering the sound of his father's voice crackling through the static, the conversations they'd had on long hauls when Tommy was just a kid riding along in the passenger seat. "He never stopped fighting," Webb said. "Even after they killed him, his evidence brought them down." Tommy nodded, unable to speak. In the end, Rick Sullivan had gotten his message through. It had just taken 7 years to reach its destination. The trucking business was thriving now. Government contracts to haul legitimate cargo, no more questions about mysterious manifests or dangerous loads. Tommy had painted over the faded letters on the garage wall, replaced them with fresh paint that read, "Sullivan and Son Trucking," in bright red letters. His father was finally home, and the family business would continue for another generation. But sometimes, late at night when Tommy was working alone in the garage, he'd tune in his father's old CB radio and listen to the truckers passing through on I-40. Their voices carried stories of the road, of families left behind and cargo delivered, of the endless highway that connected America from coast to coast. And sometimes, in the static between channels, Tommy could swear he heard his father's voice one more time. "Catch you on the flip side, son."